Hi, my name's David. Today I'm going to show you how to do the 1,000 hour service on the Hurricane SCH25 made by International Thermal Research. It's an easy job, and it's kind of nice to be able to do the work yourself and understand what's going on with your heater. So we'll get started here, and I'll show you the steps that are involved. The parts you need are the what they call the internal fuel filter. It's part number 14024. It's also called the nozzle filter. It's all of $3.25. These are very hard to clean. Some people say you can clean them, but Hurricane said it's best just to replace them. This is not the inline filter that you change once a year. That's completely different, and that's covered in one of my other videos. This is the air cleaner for the compressor, and this is an adapter because I'm not sure whether I have the new model, which is this, or the old model, but if I have the old model, we'll use this adapter to attach this filter. It's part number 6020, and so it's the filter and the adapter. And then you'll also need the O-ring. They call it the nozzle O-ring, and that is item number 14025. It's $2.75. So in case your O-ring is damaged, you'll have a new one to replace it. If you're in the States, you can get the parts at their U.S. parts distributor. Their phone number is 800-993-4402. And if you're up in Canada, you can get the parts at International Thermal Research up there. Their phone number is 800-755-1272. The people at both numbers are always very helpful and very easy to work with. The other thing you'll want to do is go to itrheat.com, go to support, manuals and brochures, marine heating systems, and then service manuals. And you'll find there this one-page summary of the steps involved for the 1,000 hour service. It's very helpful. And you can also get at that same site the service and troubleshooting manual that covers on page 31 everything that's covered here. So those are worth getting at. Again, it's itrheat.com. Before you start working on the heater, it's important to turn your thermostat all the way down, turn off the remote switch, in our case it's in our salon, and then turn off the service switch, and they say to disconnect the power supply. So I'll show you where these switches are. In our case, I'm just going to remove the fuse, the inline fuse for the heater, but I'll show you where these other switches are. This is our remote switch in the salon, so just turn this off and also turn your thermostat down. And like I said, to disconnect the power, I'm just going to remove our inline fuse. Otherwise, you'd probably disconnect the positive lead from your positive bus bar. The service switch is on the right-hand side, so there's a toggle switch, and so when the top is in, it's on. When you push it in the other position, it's off. So turn this off. Okay, the first step is to remove these 6 Phillips screws that hold on this cover. There is a gasket on this cover that has a tendency to stick. So you may have to, after you get the screws out, you may have to pull on it pretty hard at the edge to get it off. I did in my case. So now we're exposed to the workings of this thing, and we'll proceed to our next step. This thing here is your igniter, and on some of these there's a ground wire that's attached to this nut here. Mine is not grounded to the case like that, but if yours is, then take your 11/32 socket and remove the ground wire for the igniter. This is what the igniter looks like when you take it out. And by the way, if you can't get those 2 pull-apart connectors, as I could on one of them, to release, you can just leave them connected. The next thing we're going to do is loosen this thumb screw right here, and that will allow us to remove what they call the fuel block. So you don't have to take it all the way off, I don't think. You just loosen it. My thumb screw was pretty tight. I had to put a pair of needle nose pliers on it to loosen it. But once you get it loosened, then this thing just lifts or pulls right out, and you can see the nozzle there. And then we go to the next step here. Next step is to take a 3/8" socket and remove these 4 nuts that hold this plate on. Next step is to cover this fuel nozzle with a rag and then remove this burner jacket, as they call it. This is the burner jacket. When it's removed, there's a tiny bit of ash in here that I'll vacuum out in a minute. They tell you to vacuum out the whole thing, so just check both ends and vacuum anything out that you see. So now you have access to the burner chamber. Vacuum that out too. It doesn't look like I have too much in there in the way of ash, but just vacuum it out. Next step is to take a 5/8", preferably box end wrench, and unscrew this nozzle. Mine was pretty tight, but I got it loosened, and then you're able to remove it just with your fingers. There's a little tiny fuel filter in there. Be careful not to lose that. It can fall out if you aren't careful. This is the nozzle once you've removed it. This is the O-ring that we'll be replacing. When you replace it, be sure and have some lubricant on it. Even saliva is fine. This is the old fuel filter. That was up inside the assembly. In other words, it rests up here inside that fuel block. So we'll be throwing this out and replacing it with a new one. So now we're going to unscrew this body from this nozzle. So we're going to put a wrench on the nozzle, and then with some pliers with tape on them to protect it, because you don't want to damage this, we're going to unscrew this from the nozzle. The trick for installing that little internal fuel filter is to turn this fuel block with the hole facing up. I've now screwed in the nozzle, but before you screw it in, have this thing facing up, and then you can just drop that fuel filter down into this body. There's a little hole that it fits into, and then you screw the nozzle in. So I'm going to put a wrench in this now and tighten it up. And then we will install the fuel or the combustion cylinder, whatever they call it, before we install this. Now cover that fuel block and the nozzle with a rag before you insert that chamber, so that you don't get dirt in that nozzle or damage it. We now installed that combustion chamber, whatever you call it, and we'll now put the 4 nuts on to hold that in. When removing and installing those 4 nuts, it's helpful to have about a 3 or 4 inch extension on your socket. Next step is to move this fuel block into this tunnel thing, and then tighten that thumb screw. And then we will install the igniter, which is sitting right here. And then we'll put in that R-clip holding the igniter in. Okay, once you've got that R-clip in, after you've inserted the igniter, and you've got that thumb screw tightened after inserting the fuel block, and you've got your wires connected if you disconnected any, and your ground wire attached if you had one. I didn't. Then you're ready to put the cover back on. Make sure that the gasket on the cover looks like it's in good condition. As I said, on the cover, there's a gasket, a rubber gasket. Make sure that looks good. So just attach the cover, put in the screws, and the last thing we'll do is the air filter on the air compressor. This here is the old style filter for the air compressor. It attached with a hose to this fitting, which you remove, and then we're going to install this fitting here. I'm going to put yellow Teflon pipe sealant tape on these threads, and on this thread here I'm going to disassemble these, and then you'll just screw that into the compressor. To get at the air compressor, you got to take off the side panel, and then where am I pointing with the pencil, that's where the old filter attached, and that's where we're going to screw in the new style. After you've wrapped the threads with this yellow Teflon tape, meant for gases and propane and so forth. Then you will screw it into this. And then we're also going to wrap the threads on this, and then we'll screw that into the air compressor. Okay, we've got the new air filter element in, and now you just need to put on this side cover that you took off to get here. I hope yours is easier to get at than mine is. Then you're done. Do a test run, make sure it starts and runs okay, and that's all there is to it. Good luck. Okay, once you've put everything back together, then turn the power on your service panel. That's down there by the heater, that switch that's on the side of that service panel. Turn your remote switch on, in our case it's in our salon, and turn your thermostat up and do a test run. It should ignite and run just fine. Okay, lastly, I had trouble starting my heater. I kept getting what they call a flame out. The flame would not stay lit. So to make a long story short, I talked to a technician that works on these heaters, and he said he always replaces the nozzle. He buys a new one. They're about 88 bucks. So I did that, and it fired right up. So next time I do this, I will replace that nozzle, not try to clean it. He says he always replaces them. So it's running right now, and I'm sure it will be reliable for another 9 years. That's how long it's been since this heater was installed, and it's been a flawless machine. So one last thing, the technician I talked to stressed to lubricate that O-ring on the nozzle. So what I did, I took a little bit of synthetic grease with a Q-tip and put it on that, lubricated that O-ring with that. He said that's important, that it gets a good seal. So anyway, good luck.